Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. This year, apparently, probably in September, the second edition of my translation of the Poetic Edda, our most important source for the myths of the Norse gods, will be published by Hackett Publishing Company on the 10th anniversary of the publication of the first edition. This is a big deal to me. That book launched this entire career in public education, and I wanted to address in this video some natural questions and curiosity about, why a second edition, what kind of revisions and additions are there in the second edition, and especially how has my translation philosophy changed since that first edition was published in 2015. Well, when I saw the first copy of the first edition of my translation of the Poetic Edda, I was 29 years old. I had been studying Old Norse since I was 17, and I had been a faculty member at UCLA, where every year I taught Old Norse. I also taught Norse mythology every year for 3 years. And so I had a good deal of professional background and experience, but not the same amount of professional background and experience that I have now. I had not yet taught at Berkeley for 2 years. I had not yet taught at the University of Colorado for 3. I did not yet have a lot of just the reading behind me that I now have behind me. And so naturally, because we're approaching here a text that doesn't, in a lot of ways, have an agreed upon meaning in several places. Not that people don't understand what it says, not that the language is some unknown language, right? But it's poetry, it's elusive, it's not meant necessarily to be really obvious and easy on the surface. And there are all kinds of places where one might learn something new and appreciate it from some different vantage point. And I have. So I have read, countless more articles since then, and kept a running commentary for myself about what I was reading, what I was learning from it. My knowledge of Old Norse itself has deepened since then. My knowledge of other Old Germanic languages, particularly Gothic, has deepened since then. Old English too. My knowledge of the modern Scandinavian languages has improved, so has my command of a lot of secondary literature about the stuff that's in modern Scandinavian languages or in German. So all of that combined has meant that, increasingly when I've looked at my translation from 2015, it's not that I look at it and I see something bad, I look at it and I see something that I could do better now. That's not, I think, unfair or shocking that would be the case after 10 years. So when Hackett approached me about publishing a special printing for the 10th anniversary, I said, well, it's great. And we got to talking about what that would involve, and pretty soon it became clear that I wanted the chance to revise everything that I could and add some new things too. So one of the first ideas that we had was to add something that no one had ever seen before. And so, of course, no one is an exaggeration, but that few people had seen before. So we decided to add some translations. Svipdagsmål, which really consists of 2 old poems, Grågalder and Fjolsvendsmål, are included in some English language translations of the Poetic Edda, and I thought that it was time for mine to include those. They're attested in only very late manuscripts, but they are poems of about the same age. They just happen not to have been written down as early as some of the other poems in the Poetic Edda. I also added Krokumål, which is not an Eddic poem, but is very famous as the words of Ragnar Lothbrok at his death. It does not date from his lifetime, it is later than that, but it's still a pretty cool poem, and it's become famous enough that I thought putting out my version of it would be interesting. And also it demonstrates that Icelanders and other people in Scandinavia, it's actually probably from the Hebrides, greater Scandinavia at the time, continue to tell much the same stories and much the same language with much the same allusions as they had in the pre-Christian period, even centuries later. And for that reason, we'll also include, I think, the first, at least printed translation into English of Lokrur, which is a rima from probably around 1400 from Iceland. This is, again, not an Eddic poem, but it is a story told in poetry of Thor and Loki going to the realm of King Loki. He's never called Utgarda Loki in this poem. And of Thor being tricked into drinking the ocean and trying to lift Jormungandr, which he thinks is a cat, and wrestling literally old age. This story is familiar from the Prose Edda, but Lokrur may not be a reworking of just that story from the Prose Edda, but actually of a lost Eddic poem. So I thought that was a pretty interesting thing to throw in there and something new and different for people. So the first thing that I did actually at the beginning of 2025 was add these new translations. And then I got to the work of revising. So I'll tell you a little bit about some of that. First, let me mention to you that through all of this work, I have been supported as I always use this phrase friend and partner, but as a friend and partner in business of Grimfrost. These guys are really great. They really care about getting things right with their replica Viking stuff. You can get the Viking board game from them. You can get cool clothes, modern and medieval style from them, replica weapons and knives, that kind of thing, as well as books, and they ship all around the world. So check them out. It does support the channel when you do. Let them know where you came from if you buy something from them. And of course, I hope that you will consider getting my books. The most recent thing that's been published is The Wanderer's Journal. I beat mine up a little bit, but this is very nice raven blue. And it's got quotes from the Hávamál, done in younger Futhark by me, and then with the Cow by Hávamál translation, and then it's otherwise blank for your notes. And of course, I've taken a lot of video notes in it lately. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of what I've revised. What are some things that are different about my translation approach now? Because I have gone through, with the finest tooth of combs, and with 10 years of notes, and with 10 years of teaching and feedback from colleagues, from readers who have reached out to inquire about things, and from students both in my classrooms at universities and now in my Zoom webinars. So one thing is that I understand the meter much better. I made a video recently about how Old Norse meter works, and it took me a long time to understand this well, as no one ever really made an effort to explain it to me. Even in my PhD program, this was basically just never discussed. Understanding meter better, I'm now in a better position to evaluate when there are options about a line. I can tell now when a line isn't metrical. So a really interesting example of this comes up just in the very first stanza of the Poetic Edda, stanza 1 of Völuspá. The witch in the Konungsbók, Codex Regius manuscript, says, Þjóðs bið ek allar kindir. Now, in 2015, I translated just from that manuscript. I just preferred the older manuscript and didn't really mess with the other manuscripts. Poetic, which the text of Völuspá there was written about 70 years later. And I just sort of thought, well, later's not as interesting. But both are reflections of oral traditions separately. And in some places, Poetic, even though it's in worse shape now, actually has better readings. It's a little bit more carefully copied. And Poetic has the words, Þjóðs bid ek allar helgar kindir. That extra word helgar is actually required by the meter. You can't, Þjóðs bid ek is too short of a line. Kindir would be too short of a line. You need that extra helgar in the second line. So she's not saying, I ask for a hearing, I ask all kinds, all classes, she's saying, I ask all holy kindreds is really a better translation of kindir, which I use there. And then she addresses them as Meri och Minni Mogu Heimdalar, the greater and lesser sons of Heimdall. Now, Ríkstula says that a god named Rígr slept with the progenitors of the different human classes. And so originally, not looking at that word Helgar, I took this as, I asked for a hearing from all classes of men, the greater and lesser children of Heimdall, and we're greater or lesser depending on what class we are. We Jarl, Karl, Thrall, noble, middle class, peasant, slave. But that holy means that she's not talking to human beings, she's talking to the gods. And why are they the sons of Heimdall? Well, we don't know. And that's, I think a big part of what I've been willing to do in this translation that I wasn't in 2015 is when I have a question about something, I'll leave it a question and not try to kind of answer it in translating it. I don't know why she addresses the gods as the sons of Heimdall. I don't think anyone knows that. There's apparently a significant lost myth here. It's also interesting to note that work by me as well as by, and I hadn't been aware of this until very recently, by Christopher Sapp at Indiana University. We both independently reached a lot of conclusions about the age of the poems in the Poetic Edda and the Eddic tradition, and both of us conclude that Ríkstula, that poem about Rígr fathering the different human classes, which only says in the prose that Rígr is Heimdallr, is actually very old. That poem's from the 1200s, right? So that may not reflect an old tradition anyway. Now, you can go off into all kinds of speculation about how the gods are the sons of Heimdallr. One of the main speculations people have made about this, as well as Heimdallr, which almost looks like it could be world tree, home tree, is that Yggdrasil? Are they the sons of Yggdrasil? Who knows? But again, now I'm willing to leave questions and not try to answer them in the translation that way, if you see what I'm saying. And also, that's a good example of the metrical, of how understanding meter has informed my translations better. All of that work on dating poetry has also informed my translations a little bit too. For example, a big focus of my study and of Sapp's too, and of Leif Olsson's before him, and Ingrid Dahl a long time before him, was into these particle words and ov, which replace prefixes like ga in Gothic, yeah, in Old English, in cognate words in Old Norse. I now realize that there are some places where those are actually making very subtle, like not big, but subtle distinctions of meaning. And so I've been willing to follow that occasionally to get a passage that looks a little bit more cohesive and interesting. Sometimes those meanings suggested by a Gothic cognate with ga or an Old English cognate with ya have been decisive in helping me render something more punctually and I think a little bit more accurately. Again, those aren't huge differences in meanings. It's the difference between, often a good example would be Odin and his brothers in Voluspa 6 or stanza around there, maybe it's 4. They Bjodum Ipthu. Ipthu is lifted, so lifted lands. But if you look at the Old English cognitive Yipton is revealed, a tiny little bit more metaphorical. So I think revealed the lands gives you a little bit more of an interesting read than just lifted. It's not a lot of places where that was really decisive, but there's a couple places like that where I liked the slightly more metaphorical, slightly less literal shade of meaning that gave. So always my translations are made with the intent to be approachable, which is not to say dumbed down. It's to say I want people who have not made the tragic mistake of spending the last 22 years of their lives, dedicated to Old Norse. I want them to be able to read this, appreciate what it says, and discuss it with friends and family, whatever, right? Like I want it to be an approachable text. Now I want it also to be something that you can look at next to the Old Norse text, which is not printed there, but I'm happy to help you find the Old Norse text if you want it. Often shown the Old Norse text of all these poems on this channel. Just to take 15 seconds to tell you about this. Heimskringla.no has some OCR 19th century editions Those aren't always going to be very faithful to the manuscript, but it's something. The standard edition today is Jonas Kristjansson and Vestein Olason's Etukvæði, which you can get from Boksala Studenta with a foreign credit card. And of course, you can get the Old Norse text of Havamal and My Wanderer's Havamal, and there is a plan for like a Wanderer's Voluspa and maybe others in the future too. What was the other one I was going to mention? Oh, and 100.is, 100.is. Look up GKS 2365 Porto and you can find the manuscript. Look at the manuscript itself if you want. It's actually not that hard to find the Old Norse text. But I want you to be able to look at the Old Norse text next to my translation and realize where I got something, even if you see where, I've rephrased something to be a little bit more approachable to a modern audience, or, unpacked, as I like to say, a kinning. Not that there are very many kinnings in the Poetic Edda at all, but, I'll take enemy of sticks and just turn that into fire, because, a modern English-speaking audience doesn't, we're not used to unpacking these things. We just want to hear, what are you talking about? Or I'm talking about fire. So I unpack the kinning. But I want you to be able to see where I got it from. So let's look at a specific stanza. And I chose this at random. This is stanza 27 of Hemiskvilla. Gekk hlóriði greip á stafni vat með austri upp logfoki inn með orum og með austskotu bar hann til böjar bremsvín jotuns og holtriða hver í gegnum. So just going word by word. Walked pig rider gripped on prow, hoisted with water that needs to be baled, up sea horse alone with oars and with baling basket carried he to farm, sea swine of Jotun and forest swings, hot spring through. Now, sometimes people say, oh, I only want a translation that's word for word. That's word for word. All right. In the first edition, I wrote, Thor went and grabbed up the boat and oars. He didn't bail out the water, he just lifted the whole thing. And he took the whole boat with its oars and buckets, it was a good boat, to the home of the giant. Thor carried it through the forest. In the second edition, first 4 lines are the same, and the last 6 are different. Thor went and grabbed up the boat and oars. He didn't bail out the water, he just lifted the whole thing. And he took that boat with its bailing bucket and Hymir's whales to the farm of the Jotun. Thor carried it over every forest ridge. So, I took, sea swine, brimsveen. Hemiskvilla actually is a poem with a lot of kinnings. It's interesting that that's randomly the stanza that came up here. Hemiskvilla and then a couple of the Helge poems are really where you see most of the kinnings in the Poetic Edda. But sea swine is either boat or whale, so of course I'm unpacking that. I'm just trying to be more attentive to reflecting honestly what I see on the page in Old Norse and making an honest reflection of that in English and trying a little bit less to editorialize. Another thing is I've become much more consistent about translating certain words. So every time that the Old Norse text is Jotun or Thors, I translate Jotun, not giant, because I think giant is just too misleading. When the text says Asir, the family of gods includes Odin and Thor, and used more broadly all the gods, I translate Asir. Other terms, God, Tivar, I translate God, but if it says Asir, I say Asir. I translate colors consistently all one way. I translate Rek consistently as course of life, which affects a few translations. Basically, any word that I found to be even a little bit culturally loaded, I try to make sure that, while I'm not trying to teach you Old Norse in this text, that I'm consistently translating it so that you can tell at a glance, even if you don't read Old Norse, oh, this is talking about the same thing here as it is there, right? I think that that's an important thing to do. So I feel like I get, one chance though to introduce you to something new. So I sometimes feel like I get a little bit of kickback about, well, this video that you made is too much for the casuals, Or on the other side, well, this video that you made is too much for people, or specialists and already know Old Norse. Well, both of those people are my audience, right? I am trying to make a living off of teaching Old Norse and related subjects, and I don't want to teach just, if you will, freshman intro level or just PhD seminar level. I want to teach both. So I'm always trying to reach both, or one and then the other. So my videos have tended to alternate between both audiences, and I intend, always to do that. I'm always trying to reach people who are just curious about this, and also people who are looking for information that's more specialized and they can get easily anywhere else, especially in English. And this book, of course, is an attempt to aim at both audiences. My lovely fiance Lauren read through the first edition, and I wanted her feedback because she, knew nothing about this stuff when we met. Never had an interest in any of this stuff, and so I said, like, you're reading this for the first time, and you are. What do you want here that you don't see? And there were several things that were amazing, good suggestions. One was move the glossary up front, because it's like she didn't realize there was a glossary until she finished the book. And I've heard that complaint before, so great idea. The glossary's moved up front. Index the glossary so people can tell what poem each character is named in. Didn't want to index it by page or stanza. That would have taken a year. But indexing it by poem at least makes it much easier to tell at a glance. So where can I read about Ragnarok, or where can I read about Mothvit here? I mean, that's one place, but at least now that it's one place. She suggested family trees. There are now family trees for the gods and all the human heroes in the Poetic Edda. I drew a map. Yes, I free drew a map of the Norse cosmos. And one day it was this act of, unusual madness, creativity, whatever, but that's included. And then she suggested several places where, I just, again, reading it for the first time, it's like, well, you've never defined this term. You got to define this, whatever. She found the introduction, for the most part, to be good for someone of her audience. But I have added a lot more to the introduction. So the introduction, most of what's there in the first edition is still there in the new one, with a couple things rephrased that just aren't the way I phrase things anymore. But I've added big sections to it. I've added sections about dating. I've added sections about manuscripts other than the Codex Regius. I've added sections about the Goths and the Huns, the historical background of a lot of the heroic poems. Added a big section about meter, even though this is an English translation. Now that I understand meter, I want to explain it to people and show, I'm not hiding this from you. This is how it works and how it's really freaking hard to do in English. So, it's hard to get the content across if you're trying to get the meter across. And so once I show you the meter, I can then explain it. This is why I try to get the content across without trying to mimic the meter. If I can get it to sound metrically sort of like the original, that's icing. It's never the cake. So those are a lot of additions are made. Not really her suggestion, more like me thinking about people who might pick this up and have a little bit more specialized knowledge who might want information about that all in one place. I have a much bigger further reading section with a lot more books about all kinds of subjects related to this that you can go find. They're not all in English in case people are capable of reading German or Scandinavian languages. I think all the ones in the first edition were in English. I've reworked the intros to many of the poems so that now several of them have much longer intros with their own further reading section. I didn't do that for all of them. I know which ones people tend to want to dig deeper into. So I didn't go out of my way to, rewrite the intro or add a ton of further reading or something about Gudrun Krita 3, but I definitely did for Voluspa. So there's a little bit of judgment calls there, but that definitely added some pages. Overall, it's 100 pages longer than the first edition. It's also done on different paper and different cover paper. It's not the shiny I would think of it as almost like a library softcover that the original Poetic Edda or Saga of the Volsungs or Two Sagas of Mythical Heroes paperback is on. It's the same paper and cover material as for the Wanderer's Hallmal paperback for the paperback edition. So I think it's a little nicer, that kind of more matte finish. That also seems to be a little bit more durable. The first edition Poetic Edda gets beat up a little bit, just because the cover material kind of, a lot of those kind of books peel. It's not me indicting Hackett's quality. It's just me saying this is better, right? To say something is better is not to say that the first thing is worse or bad. So I don't feel like, I don't feel ashamed for what I did at 29 or between 25 and 29. But I'm going to be very happy to have this out there and replacing it. We won't be making new copies of the first edition anymore after this. I am hoping that I get an opportunity to make an audiobook out of the second edition just as I did out of the first. Because right now the audiobook is of the first edition and even a pretty old printing of the first edition. So there's even some fixes that I did in later editions that aren't in the audiobook right now. Also, I'm extremely irritated by the trolling top review on the audiobook of Poetic Edda on Audible. It's irritating. I mean, you can't control what reviews it's going to be, but it's like I can at least have a chance that something else will top the reviews. I've always been flattered though by the really good reviews that the first edition has gotten. I mean, I did manage to get people who would never have been able to, approach the Poetic Edda before to read it and enjoy it and learn from it. And I've always been proud of the average ratings that have been maintained for all these books on Amazon. It's not everything, and you can't count on good luck to last, but it means something to me that this project has mattered to people, that what I've done has mattered to people. And I hope that this second edition shows that I care a lot about you, and I want you to have the highest quality translation of the Poetic Edda that I know how to produce, or would want to read myself if I weren't in this field. Well, it's enough about this for now. Thank you, Patreon, and remember that if you're on Patreon at the highest tier, the Skald tier, you can join me for a monthly call about progress on the Prose Edda translation. And thank you to those out there buying my books. Again, Poetic Edda second edition due out, they say now, in September. Well, for now, from beautiful Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.